we'd like to just kick this off for him, and if you guys have questions, please refer to the chat box, and then we will have a question and answer session at the very end. And again, let's welcome Robert Hougham.
Thank you, Lacey. Am I coming through all right with my screen?
Here we go. Oops. Did you receive the link?
Yep. How's that? All right. Whoa. Great. How's that showing up?
Looks good. I can see it.
Okay. Well, it sounds like there's a little feedback, so I might put on my headphones here to do this presentation so everything sounds real clear. Thanks for the introduction, and thank you to everyone that signed up to attend this webinar. Like any presentation about technology, there's always a little bit of a wrinkle at the front end with the technology that we're using and getting on the same page, and that's pretty standard. And I think that's par for the course when we use technology outside too. So I'll speak a little bit about that throughout this webinar. My name, as Lacey introduced, my name's actually Justin Hougham. Robert's I guess my professional name, but I work at the University of Wisconsin Extension, and I'm faculty here as a statewide specialist for environmental science, and I'm also a director for an outdoor education center in the Dells, which is in the center of the state. You can see a picture of that there in the background. This idea, whether to take technology outside into our camping programs or environmental programs, is a pretty old one. The thing that's changed is what technologies we're actually talking about, and this story goes back pretty far in terms of what, whether we should have cameras or how should we use videos, and now of course phones and iPads and such. So I'm going to go over some of the approaches that we use here in Wisconsin, and also be available for any questions you have maybe about your own technology adoption. All right. So right here you see a photo of some of our students outside using some technology, and this is what I'm shooting for when I want to open the door for tablets or phones. I want to see students using those devices to connect more deeply to their time outside, and that's what you see here. This young lady on the left is using a microscope, and there's an example of that in the kit, and the young man there is using an iPad. And I choose to avoid a lot of the problems that can come up with technology before they happen by just choosing tools up front that work well outside and also move us towards a curricular outcome. And that's kind of where this phrase came from: turn that thing off and go outside. I think I've heard that a lot of times, even as a kid myself, about the TV or video games. And I don't think that's any different than what's happening today all around the country. And I think what we have an opportunity to do as youth development professionals is role model appropriate use and appropriate timing and amount of use of technology outside, and camp's a place that can happen. This meme was going around. I saw it online, maybe on my LinkedIn profile, or maybe it was on Facebook, and I thought it was funny. Of course, it's utilizing the iconography here of a Wi-Fi signal, and for those of you just listening on the phone, it says there is no Wi-Fi in the forest, but you will find a better connection. And at face value, I think that's humorous, and I get some nods. But and also, I wonder what happens if you unpack that and say, you know, how can Wi-Fi help us with a better connection to the forest? And in one hand, moving towards you know, video games or maybe social media probably wouldn't be examples of that. But what if you're using your portable device to connect to Wi-Fi to understand the forest better, or you're geocaching, or you're looking up different habitats or different species that you encounter, or you're coordinating with a curriculum, or collecting artifacts yourself. So I don't think it's a straight up or down vote on whether we should have it out there. It's just about what type of connection you want to have. And in some cases, I think that connection can get stronger. As I mentioned, I'll say a little about the context that I do this in. I work at Upham Woods Outdoor Learning Center. It's a part of the University of Wisconsin. And 41 years ago, not 41, in 1941, 75 years ago, we had you know, our kind of charter statement here that hadn't changed a lot. And we still work as a laboratory for the advancement of conservation, agriculture, and rural culture. And you know, technology's been there since the beginning for us. The first superintendent that Upham Woods had, Ranger Mac, Wakeland McNeil, who's in the 4-H Hall of Fame, he was a radio show host in the 30s and 40s, and he had a program called A Field with Ranger Mac. And his goal, just kind of like our goal today, is to use technology to communicate widely about what's important outside and hope that people get out there themselves. And he was just using that with the technology of the time, which was radio. Now, of course, we're using the internet or teleconferencing software, but I think the same things are happening. And just for scale, just say further context, we're working with about 11,000 kids a year in different programs, and they're coming from schools, and they're coming from 4-H clubs, and they're part of camps, and they're part of leadership programs, and they spend a lot of the time outside and on the river with our approximately 20 staff. And 12 months a year we have them outside working with these digital kits in the snow or in the water or wherever they have questions. So like I mentioned, this site right here is one of our classrooms, or outdoor classrooms, and here you see a handful of canoes. And for any of you out there that work in camps, you know that this is a pretty common scene. You know, when you're teaching canoeing, is you can barely get them all going in the same direction, and that's no different than what we find here in Wisconsin. Yeah, what I'd like to point out here, though, is the perspective of this photo. You'll notice it's downward facing, and it looks down on the kids and canoers. And that photo is from a point of view, perspective from a drone. And I think this is one of a dozen examples we could bring up that are about the interface between technology and the environment. In this case, I think it's timely. Here is the drone operator, Tony Roman, and he's taking photos with the drone. He took this photo as well, and you can see these young folks here on his left. And if you imagine a thought bubble above their heads, they'd be saying, I think when I look at their faces and look at this photo, the caption would be, they'd be saying, when do I get to use that? Or, oh, that looks neat. I've seen one of those. When's it my turn? And I think that's the reaction students have to technology pretty much all the time, whether it's a drone or a microscope or sometimes even tablets. When do they get, they're looking for that connection, and this is a place they feel comfortable exploring the world around them. And I think it's just provocative to think about that. 10 years ago we wouldn't be talking about drones, but here we are. We have them in our extension program, and we have them, even at camp when we have special groups on. And I think that's an example of a shifting baseline. And this J.B. McKinnon quote, when it comes to nature, normal is in the eye of the beholder. And what was normal yesterday or normal today might not be normal tomorrow. It's what certain people have a familiarity with, and that's true literally in the natural world, but also figuratively in the world of environmental education. in the natural world, when I was coming up as a kid, this is an example of what was normal, the level of sea ice in the polar regions of the globe. And now for my daughter, when she was just born, she's young, and what's normal for her is going to be a real different normal for sea ice or species that grow around our house, or animals, or what we find in the water. Normal for her a generation later is different than what it is for me in the wild world outside. Well, the same is true with our technologies in the classroom. What was normal for me when I was a kid, didn't involve digital microscopes or any tablets or anything like that. Maybe we had a VCR or a reel-to-reel. But in this case, you see this is a part of our wet lab. You see some students examining macroinvertebrates with a wireless microscope and a thermal imager in this photo. And I think that's a good example. What's become normal to us today, and who knows what these young ladies will find is normal for themselves when they have their own careers or jobs are out in the workforce. And I'll take an even bigger step back and talk a little bit about some of the theoretical foundations for field-friendly use of technology. And this program that I have been working on was started out with a conceptual frame called adventure learning, and I was working in the University of Idaho at the time, and a colleague asked me if I liked adventure learning, and I was like, I like adventure, I like learning, that sounds like just the thing for me. I didn't realize that, of course, it was a proper noun, and it turns out it's a conceptual frame. And we went on to do a lot of work in this area. And the points of this graphic I'd like you to focus on, that you'll see throughout the rest of the presentation, are the words authentic narrative, media artifacts, and issue in place. Those are the big ideas we took from that. Later on, we refined that, and this is published in May 2015 in the Journal of Geoscience Education. We refined that down to work at a smaller scale, and you see the center column here is what we focus on now as a refinement from that previous model. We focus on technologies that help students generate knowledge and help them make local and focused observations and connect their observations to those that other students take before or after. And we did that in the field. We tried it out in a few different areas. This example is with students out on the main Salmon River in Idaho, and we're using digital technologies here with a classroom of students and a fisheries biologist you see in the background, and we're taking measurements. And this is an example of an appropriate use of a tablet. Some people might say this is a wilderness area, we shouldn't have distractions with screens, but in this case, these screens help us learn more about the natural world around us. I think this is a good example of that. And some of that might just be low-tech measurements, as you see happening in this photo, but that data today is getting collected in tablets and digital documents, so that real Forest Service employees or real land managers can make decisions or models. And so in one way, it's helping us at the time that we're using it, but it's also helping prepare these students for a real perspective on what it means to have a career in the outdoors. We had two more pilot studies we looked at, and I'll share a couple of those with you here. This is called the Adventure Learning at Equator, and that's my left foot there. And we did an adoption of these tools with the intent that students in a classroom would follow what we're doing out on the ocean. So we sailed this little boat from Baja, Mexico to Tahiti, and we were connecting the science that we were doing on the boat to the science the students were doing back in their classrooms via appropriate technology. And this tool right here is called the Kestrel, and it's still in our kit today. And it's a good example of a mobile digital device that helps us learn about the outdoors, and I'll speak about that in a second. Moving on to the last example, kind of in the origination of this approach, was another expedition we did called Adventure Learning at Greenland. And this was, we worked with JSEP, which is a the Joint Science Education Program through the National Science Foundation to work with a group of students up on the polar ice sheet. And this was on the mainland of Greenland. And those students got to go to a lot of different lab sites and take data themselves. And they used tools to do that were available to them back in the States when they returned, and to their classmates as well afterwards, to get a better sense of those pieces of information. And so that's exciting. And I want to point out one other piece here, and that's that real science was happening in the background of all these different expeditions, whether it was out on the river with a fisheries biologist or with a polar scientist up in Greenland. Those things end up being published into reports, and that's an important part of the scientific process. But an important part of the teaching process is getting students excited about what's going on in the world around them. And in this example, the work that was being done was on the cover of Nature magazine and or Nature Journal, and that happened a year and a half later after the data was collected. And this photo was taken again by my colleague and partner Brant Miller, who was on the project, and the students were right there at that time, and they heard and were aware of all this long before it was published. So I think that excitement is important, whether it's big global science or really small local science. This idea stuck with me after we got done with the project, and I think it's still valid when we look at our camps and we look at our opportunities to go to wild places around our states and state parks or rivers or lakes. There's a sense of adventure there, and there's real scientific issues that can be brought to life by using technology in an appropriate way. Some more theory about that, if that's the angle that you like to see an adoption of curriculum from. This would include some other writers and philosophers around teaching in the outdoors today. David Sobel's one. He writes that the exploration of nature should be a critical component of education, and I couldn't agree more. What is also critical to recognize is that we have that shifting baseline happening all around us about what's normal. And Mark Prensky wrote first about a couple of terms. The one you see at the bottom here is digital natives. And he defines those as a generation of youth who have developed learning strategies shaped around the use of technology. And so if you've seen a cousin or nephew or your own kid going up to a TV and swiping on it with their finger, that's a kind of an anecdotal example of exactly that. It's so native to them in their thinking about the world that a screen is a touch screen, that's how they interact with everything as a default, where folks that are my age, that's a new thing, and we wouldn't go up to a TV and swipe on it because we have a different framework that we came from, from 30 years ago. So that's a small example, but a big idea that our students cognitively are coming from a space where they are used to and expect digital tools to help them navigate the world. And this is one phrase that's been applied to that idea. The piece of the connection here is taking it outdoors. How do we accept that students are moving in that world, young people are moving in that world, but we want to also be outside. And technology can help us with our outdoor inquiry in a lot of positive ways. One of those is through inquiry-based instruction, and it's been shown to engage all kinds of different projects and curriculums in ways that enliven what's happening outdoors, and also bring in new students that are new youth that are interested in the outdoors in new ways. And I think that positive scientific attitude is really one of the things that comes from a genuine sense of inquiry about the world around us. Some studies show that using technology can be a source of motivation. Here is a study showing that almost 50% students responded that they felt the opportunity to use technology was positive, and it helped them with being more collaborative and hands-on while they were outside. This is some great work out of Penn State, Heather Zimmerman's work, Technology can support reflection and articulation of new knowledge if artifacts are captured for sharing. And what you see here, this project, these photos came from a research farm that we had a summer camp at, looking at our farm to plate kind of concept, which I think many of you probably have heard of a version of that. We had students looking around the research farm and at different parts of the production system and using these tools to dig deeper and to collect what I call, and many others call, digital artifacts. And they're photos with a microscope, or in this case, thermal imagery, that leads to other questions that support people reflecting, but it also supports new knowledge and new reflection later. The last case I'll make for technology outside is that it helps us see things in new ways. And then I'll go through a couple of the tools we use. This is an example of GIS. Technology helps us see the relationships between different variables. Here you see an example of that. Another way that technology helps us see is, you can see in my stick drawing here, that's me on the left of your screen. You have some things in the middle, what we can see. There's things above and below that we know exist, like radio waves and X-rays that we can't see, but we know help us understand the world better around us, even though they're out of sight. And the same goes on another axis, where we can see the landscape and we can see sand particles, but we also have technologies that help us see smaller things and larger things. So that's galaxies or atomic particles, I'd say. And so when I look at adopting technologies outside that'll help my kids at camp or help them with natural sciences or interest in careers in natural resources, I try to choose tools that do get us out of our box into seeing new things that would be revealed by using these tools, but at the same time that won't distract from making real observations. And the kit that I have developed through this whole process is called the Digital Observation Technology Skills Kit. And if my video camera is still working, they get boxed up in a box that's about, you can see it in the photo, but also in the video here. This is about a briefcase-sized box that's waterproof and allows us to put it in a canoe and walk around with it in the woods. And if it's raining, we can shut it, and it won't ruin any of the tools. The tools themselves support the scientific method, in particular, collection of data. And I won't spend much time on that, but I wanted to note we do focus on a scientific method approach, and we do two frames that we want to start with. And we ask our students, what type of stories they tell and why. And of course, as you would imagine, the answers to that are to educate and entertain and remember. And turns out we're pretty good at telling stories. What we can become better at is telling scientific stories. And we also know, most of our middle schoolers can tell you that a scientific study has a hypothesis and a data point and methods for taking observations. But merging those two ideas to tell a story scientifically is a powerful place that we can stand in our outdoor STEM approaches to outdoor camps. Part of that's unpacking who does science and what do scientists look like. The traditional version of that, of course, is the guy with the crazy hair and the gloves and the lab coat, or science is done in a lab. But we want to develop identities and aptitudes that are around any science that's happening all around us. And as you can see in these photos, science is happening outdoors all over the world. And whether it's with wildlife or fisheries or invasives, as you see in the lower right corner, or soils, or even in space, there's a lot of science that happens outdoors and in really exciting ways in our own home communities. And looking at the instrumentation that we use here, we know even despite that, our students, our youth may not grow up to be scientists themselves, but thinking scientifically about the world will help them as engaged citizens, as troubleshooters if they have a problem in their life, or they're working on a piece of technology, or their car, or computer, or phone, or making a decision about a budget, or voting. all those different decisions can be seen as scientific processes to come up to a conclusion. And I saw this photo outside of my one of the classrooms I was visiting in an outreach, and I thought a lot. This made an impression on me. You know, that back to that idea of a digital native. You know, this young individual here. You know, it says they want to grow up to be a scientist, and you know, just like somebody 30 years ago couldn't imagine what I'd be doing as a scientist. You know, I know that I don't know what is ahead for them either, but I want to prepare them for that world. And I think technology is a big part of that. Our pedagogical considerations, I think I've covered that decently well here already. I mentioned the use of a hypothesis in our scientific method, and in this fourth bullet or third bullet there, using artifact keeping to reinforce focused local observations. Those are real important parts of the kit. The practical application here, which is really the million-dollar question, is how do you choose tools that work outdoors without a lot of troubleshooting? And these are the criteria that I publish that have to be met before I will put it in the box, put it in my kit, and use in the field, because I want it to work really well every time. So I use memory when I can. I use memory that's removable, like you see on the memory card there, and power that's removable, and ideally like in a AA. And there's a lot of technology that'll be in different formats, but if I can put if something's dead in the field because its memory's full or because the batteries are dead, I want to be able to change those out really quick so that we can move on with our lesson outside. These next two, portability and offline approaches, we do use tools sometimes that use the internet, but for the most part I like to use tools that don't need it to work. I work in the forests and rivers quite a bit, and I don't want that to get in the way of what we're going to be observing. This last piece, these last couple pieces are I think some of the most important here. The dedicated device is that's a concept of, does the tool just do one type of thing? And you can get an app for about anything on your iPhone or iPad, but it's difficult to manage 30 kids that are working on all their own iPads with all their own apps. There's a lot of drift, you might say, in terms of where they may be headed with their energy and time. But if they have a dedicated tool, like when I hand out a GPS, I know that they're going to be doing something really specific and really related to this. And that helps contain, in terms of classroom management, I guess you'd say, contain the experience in a positive way. Platform neutrality, the second to last bullet here, means that the tools I select are tools that can work with a Mac or an iPad or a Nexus tablet or an Android or a Chromebook or a laptop. I want to make sure what I choose doesn't require the communities or schools or partners or clubs that I work with to have one of those things or another. I want to come with my box and be able to meet them where they are. Whatever they already have, I want to be able to match up with that. And lastly, digital artifact keeping, and that means that it collects images that we can use later. So the kit itself, on the left here you see a traditional hand lens, and in the middle and the right you see a use of a digital microscope. Same concept, looking closer at things, but because we can take an image as an artifact later, we have a lot more that we can do with it that might be instructive. Now this is another photo I found on my game camera, and our students are ready for this, right? It's what I see here. If there were a caption, she found this game camera with our as a geocache and took a selfie with it, which I think is something that's something a digital native would do. They'd see an opportunity like that. But I look at it with some humor too, that our students are waiting for us to get with the program and meet them outdoors with some of this technology. One of the ways that we divide up the kit is in roles, and here you see a handful of those roles defined by tool. So the Navigator is going to use a GPS. Our media specialist is somebody that's going to use our camera to tell the story. Our meteorologist is going to use a weather station that's going to document those things to make conclusions about them later when they combine that data with other people's work. Our microbiologist uses a microscope and an iPad to look at the look at the world through the lens of the very small. We also look at big landscape level, but the microscope is a really exciting way to see that too. And then lastly, the thermal imager and investigator. Those individuals will be using these devices. They're either a thermal imager or an infrared thermometer. These are reasonably affordable, and they allow us to see these relationships between the adaptations we see outdoors and in the way that plants are collecting sunlight or animals are making it through winter. So that Navigator, as I mentioned, is using the GPS. I use the one pictured here is an eTrex, and I've really moved away from these. Back to that digital native comment, I grew up with a GPS similar to this, and it didn't bother me much. But if it doesn't have a touch screen now, it's a real obstacle for young people to pick it up and be successful in a short amount of time. So I would strongly recommend any GPS that is a touch screen as an interface, not a toggle. We use that Navigator across our map to drive them towards different places on our outdoor classroom, but they can use this in any part of the world too. Our media specialist I mentioned earlier uses a video camera. The one pictured here is called the Verb. The one in my hand is called a Canon, but this has removable batteries, which is important. As I mentioned, I can easily replace these, and a memory card that comes out, and that's what makes it easy for me to get those digital artifacts back to them as evidence of the good time they had with us when we were at camp or doing an outreach. That memory card is also, in our game camera, and we're able to switch those out interchangeably and collect more information about our outdoor world. And you can see a fox here and some raccoons, and that's helping us see more than would meet the eye normally. Our meteorologist, I mentioned, we use a Kestrel. The Kestrel 5000 or Kestrel 4000 are really good devices. There's a really affordable version, the Kestrel 1000 and 2000. Those series are much cheaper, but they get across some of the same ideas: the temperature, the wind speed, the humidity, and there's a lot of things that we can learn about the outdoor world by putting some numbers behind our sensory observations, and that's what the meteorologist does. Here you see a couple examples of that. And it's a good way to test hypotheses and develop a better environmental literacy about the world around us. The thermal investigator, again, most of the energy on Earth is derived from the sun, and most of the organisms that we see outdoors in our camp or in our environmental education program are interacting with that energy in some way, whether they're eating plants or maybe they are plants. They're collecting that energy and turning it into food. And this is a tool that helps begin to unpack that process and help us teach where there are habitats, where there are microclimates, and lastly, the connection, of course, to being investigating light. We use a lux meter, light investigator, and this tool is pretty affordable and easy to use, and it tells us how much light is coming down from the sun to these places that we would be observing. And as I mentioned earlier, the thermal imager, this is a big hit as well because it produces a picture that's in thermal gradations that make it more exciting to explore underneath a log or in a cave or underneath a stream bank. These things work indoors and outdoors, obviously, too, and most of the time we introduce the tools indoors and then another day go outdoors. Some schools, will, as outreach, will work with them in the classroom and then move the classroom outdoors the next time. Some of these tools, too, have indoor applications. So thermal imager is a good tool for looking at energy audits in your home or in your classroom. They're used in a lot of different professional applications, too. And here you can see the photo, immediately captures attention and is interesting. And that photo is produced on a external memory card that I can pull out and put into a website or put into a lab report with the students. And last but not least, our microbiologist. This is a two-part tool that works with a microscope that wirelessly connects to an iPad. And this is the only screen-based tool that I use. Two people will be involved with this project, and they'll look out at new things. They don't have to collect any samples. They don't have to pick any flowers or disturb any sites. They can look right in the site, right where they are, and collect a digital image of what they found. And it supports a team-based approach towards inquiry, and that inquiry, when it's shared, gets more momentum when it works in groups of 3 or 4. And here you can see a mushroom is a good example, and you can take an even deeper look at an organism that's already of interest, and it becomes even more interesting with more detail. And they didn't have to pick it, they didn't have to touch it, they can just use the wireless interaction with it. So it's it's still there for someone else to enjoy. Recently we've added a water monitor, and that's been related to some of our external funding. This kit tool observes a couple different basic qualities of water, salinity, pH, conductivity, total dissolved solids, and temperature. And this again helps us look at the quality of water over time as we revisit sites. So these tools get connected to a lot of different professions through time, and that's exciting. Yeah, it's exciting because these are real tools that people really use, or variants of them are used later. And we believe that supports a genuine connection to careers in our communities and professions or pursuits of study later. And anytime our camps can support students in their future, I think we're doing them a service. And as many of you are familiar, this follows the experiential learning model. And when we want to support reflection after we've done something, we are using digital artifacts to do that. And when we are moving the next steps of looking at our inquiry and making a hypothesis, or looking at a place in a new way, we're applying the use of the data we collected to create that next step of our process in our STEM camps, or our classroom activities, or our traditional environmental science camps. Really quickly, some case studies. We have researched this, and we've got a number of grants to do so. This particular grant, we worked with 240 students, predominantly from free and reduced lunch programs, and we compared using technology or not using technology in the field, and we wanted to know if this would support their time as learners or if it was a distraction, because I think we all probably hear and suspect that technology can be a distraction. So in this method, we did a pre and post test, and we also split the groups so that some had a non-tech experience and some had a high-tech experience. And these artifacts are directly from the reflections that those students did. And they also they created imagery themselves, and they also took a pre-test and a post-test, which you can see the results here. You can see on the left side, those with an asterisk were statistically significant in the difference that they had between pre and post-test experiences. And so those include liking to use technology, but also liking to be outside and liking to look at plants and birds. So we found from this study with multiple groups that this was actually an enhancer for their interest outdoors and this type of approach and consideration. We felt that their awareness of the tools supported their awareness of what was outdoors around them in an exciting way. Another case study was more longitudinal. This is with one of our urban partners in a dual language immersion school, and we worked with them for the course of a semester, and they applied this approach periodically, week to week, with different things that they did, and they culminated with a data summit at the end where they became the storytellers for the time that they were using the kits and the times they were working with our camp or being outside. Lastly, we did a really scaled down version of it called Digging Deeper with Data, where we used really kind of affordable or entry-level tools to get more repetition with more groups, so that the price point would be lower. And those students, we interacted with them once a month, and while we were gone, they would take data and create graphs themselves based upon that data, which helped them meet their instructional objectives. And we had a lot of positive responses from teachers that were involved in this, and how it supported their scientific thinking and supported their literacies, both in written and mathematic forms, which is a big conversation for a lot of schools today and our partners. One last piece that we facilitate is called a scientific story, and examples of that can really be varied depending upon the group you have and in the time you have with them. But we encourage them to reflect on using the tools in a focused way. This was inspired by a book here that I have here called How to Be an Explorer of the World, and this is it's $15. You can get it on Amazon. It's actually great. It's super low tech, and it just encourages good exercises, good kind of stop and reflect type of exercises that make us better observers of what's around us. And it doesn't say anything about digital tools at all, but it is more focused on becoming a better storyteller and a better observer, which also is one of the goals of the D.O.T.S program. And this is an example of one of the sheets that they fill out. Again, it can be pretty simple. In this case, a student was reflecting on what she observed as we're hiking. And here's a really long example of including some of the digital observations that were used with our temperatures in a nature center. So I think we're getting close to some Q&A time. So I'll wrap up and say that we are Wisconsin-based, but we do work all over the world with these kits. And if they can work outside at our camps, they can work outside anywhere. And in a Wisconsin example, you can see a pretty decent saturation of our state uses these or loans them out or partners with schools to have exciting science activities in the outdoors through their extension programming partners. In the last, I guess about 2 years, we served about 7,000 folks total. And some of those are kits that are stationed places, and some of those are kits that are ones that we facilitate, and sometimes they're a part of different traveling curricular options. So as we reflect on how to use it well outdoors, a lot of that decision making at the front end is what makes for a good time outside using tools. And some of that is about your pedagogical approach or your learning objectives. And for me, that's to support inquiry and to support observation. And then some of it's practical, and I mentioned those as well, the use of simple data tools, tools that are not going to distract or be a troubleshooting hassle, but ones that directly get students and adults engaged outdoors directly in the environment that they live in, whether it's urban or rural. You can read more about this in a recent edition of Green Teacher. We have the cover story for this particular journal at this particular issue, and there's a lot of other ideas in this particular journal for this issue, the fall 2016 version. they go over different strategies that people have used to integrate with arts, outdoors with technology, or programs that are like what I do, but programs that are different than that. Lastly, when we work with our partners, they often want some preparatory material to get ready for it or to refresh between exposures. So we have a FAQ page up that has long form written instructions, but also YouTube videos that are up for each of our tool sets. So someone can just click on our website and get a quick primer on how to use a given tool. And again, that site is listed here. It's fyi.ux.edu/environmental education. And there's a few of the citations that I referenced in the presentation. And if you're interested in more information about it, please drop me a line. My email is justin.hougham@ces.ux.edu. And I think that'll take us up to our question and answer time. Trying to find the...
Justin, thank you so much for an absolutely wonderful presentation. And yes, now is the time that we would really like to field any of the questions, and Justin will be taking those. And you can type those in the chat box or go ahead and unmute yourself and start asking questions. It looks like there are a couple of questions in the chat box. First is, do you have a list of all the equipment you use on your web page?
Yeah, all the tools we use are on the website that I listed there. The environmental education site through the University of Wisconsin Extension is where I host all that. And it also includes some of the different grab-and-go activities. Each of the tools, I'll have an FAQ on how to use it, a video on demonstrating how to use it, and then a grab-and-go activity that'll kind of get you started on the first steps with it. And I see another question here. What is the coolest water quality experiment you do with electronic tools or not? Awesome. I love that question. And I have a website up that I'll show you as an example. You can find this. So I think my screen is visible to you now. Is that true, Lacey? Can you see is my screen still being shared?
I can still see your screen. Can everyone else see Justin's screen? I'm looking currently at Environmental tab. The next one to the right is the EPA.
Yeah, you got it. So this website is the one I run, Environmental Education. And if you scroll down, you'll see a few of our projects on the right-hand side. Value of a Tree is a biofuel curriculum that I've written to look at some of the wood-based biofuels that are possible around the country. Next here, you'll see it says D.O.T.S statewide water monitoring. So I'll click on that, and it'll take you to a site called EPA Water Monitoring Project. And this is an EPA grant we have to work around the state looking at water quality issues. And one of the questions I often get is, what do you do with the data once you've collected it and once these students do things with it? So this is a good example of that. in addition to the question that was asked by the attendee here. So if I go to my data collection tab right here, we of course do surveys and eval for the students in their instructional process, but we also have this website that is powered by the data they collect. So in each of these sites you should see a heat map now that indicates where data is being collected around the state with our water quality test kits. And we were just up on the Bad River Reservation up here where it says 10. So I'll click on that, and these are the sites we collected data on. And this focused again on water quality. So we looked at Chequamegon Bay, which is a part of Lake Superior, and we looked at some of the tributaries out on the reservation that feed it. And as we zoom in, you can find data points that produce information that are digital artifacts of those measurements. So you click on a data point and it'll show you all the things they measured in that spot. The tool sets will produce some of these variables, and other times you'll have to add other tool sets. And so one of the ones that I use is called the Water Monitoring Kit, which is not a very creative name, but it works. And Lamont makes these. And we'll do these water samples whenever we cross a stream or a tributary. On down below later, a student can interact with this website and they can refine the variables in the ranges that they're looking at to figure out where the highest phosphates were, highest nitrates were, or where the lowest dissolved oxygen was, or where the hottest water was. It allows more questions to happen, I guess you'd say, after the fact. Lastly, it automatically will graph variables against each other. So as we know from atmospheric testing or from water testing, most variables are tied to or related to other variables in the environment, like air temperature and water temperature, for example, or biodiversity, or macroinvertebrate presence or absence, or water quality type. So that's what you see here in the bottom of the site. So those are some things I use for water quality, specifically with the D.O.T.S kits, as well as using some low-tech applications too, which these are pretty affordable. And during World Water Day, they often do a free distribution of these kits. So take a look online for that. Lamont makes those.
Justin, one of the next question that was presented was, will these slides be available for download? Do you mind if people would just email you directly and then you could send them the documentation that you would feel most comfortable with?
Yeah, I can. I would encourage them to email me directly. That way I can point them to the right link. I'll put up a version of this on the web. So this is some of these photos are high res, so it's like a 100 megabyte file. So I'll reduce some of the slides in their resolution, so it might be a little easier to download it.
Excellent, thank you. And if you would like, you can send that to myself or Victoria, and then we could also try to put it up on the NAE4HA website with this recording. So then I see another question. You addressed how you bring technology to the outdoors. Do you have any experience suggestions for how to either engage youth with their own devices or recommend them to use only your technology devices?
Yeah, that is a really good question. I think that's a deep philosophical question at some level. You know, my preference is providing the technology myself for a few reasons. I can choose technologies appropriate for the experience I want to facilitate, that I can also make sure the tools work. Another piece is about access. And early on when I was working with this type of stuff, it was a critique that was often provided that Some kids don't have smartphones, and if we were using apps and technology outside and counting on teachers or students to bring their own devices, you're leaving some kids behind. And that stuck with me. And I obviously can't hand out 28 smartphones to people when they come to camp or I come to their school. So I kind of focused on what I thought I could hand out to students to make sure everyone had a equal access to an experience outdoors. And so that's the path I've taken. There's nothing wrong with encouraging them to use their own device. I just personally ran into some resistance to that just in the places I was working, because not every student had a tool to use, and it presented kind of a inequity in the way we were programming. And that's an evolving conversation. 5 years ago, that's a little different story than it is today. But I find that a side effect of providing the technology is that we can be more focused on things we want to do together rather than sometimes having kids playing games or social media while we're supposed to be in the field having a learning experience. That's a great question, and there's actually a lot of literature out there about going one way or another with that idea. Some schools really try to solve that in a different way by going one-to-one, and you may be familiar with that term. They have one device per kid, and they issue it, and I think that's another good step to meet them in the middle.
The next question I see is, other than the EPA grant, do you partner with other organizations for your environmental monitoring?
Yeah, we sure do. One of the reasons water monitoring works so well is back to that access issue. Whether you're a school in the middle of a city or in the countryside or on a river or on a lake, on the coast, whatever, water isn't a part of your community, it's part of your life, and there's an equal opportunity to access that issue regardless of where you land in the world. And that's why I enjoy working with partners that are doing that. Similarly to the question you asked, the communities often already have something going on around water. When I work in Milwaukee, they're really interested right now about lead in the water and about some of the urban water restoration and wetland sites. And so those specific organizations are really local and really community run, and I think that's awesome. I'm happy to be a partner for them and a resource to help them get tools or be an instructional asset when they do a community event. So that in the EPA grant that we wrote was set up to develop and encourage those relationships. So each of the sites we work at are different orgs. One's a middle school, one's a small school up in Ashland that has a water monitoring lab, and we work with undergrads. Another is a tribal youth serving organization. And in the city, we have a place called the Urban Ecology Center that works on water quality issues, as well as an environmental charter school called the Escuela Verde. So those are kind of, and those are some of the most satisfying examples. We also do it at our site, Upham Woods, because we're on a river, and we can do that in all our camps. So in a way, we're kind of our own partner, and do it a certain way because we have kids for 3 or 4 or 5 days at a time. But there's also a National Science Foundation grant that we're working on that's looking at water monitoring as well, and that has some of the same partners in it. I would encourage you to find out who's already doing water in your community, because those are folks that are passionate and already connected, and I've really enjoyed learning from them.
Excellent. Well, This should be wrapping it about up. Justin, thank you so much for taking the time and all of the wonderful information. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to contact him directly. And then also, if anyone is interested in also presenting a webinar, we would love to have you sign up. Please contact Victoria Allen or myself, Lacey Mann, and we would love to have more wonderful webinars like this in the future. Please look for an evaluation tool to come from member clicks. It'll either come from Lacey Mann or Victoria Allen within the next few days, and that will provide some good feedback for Justin. But again, thank you everyone for taking the time today and the good information.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, have a wonderful day, everyone.